For 18 years, General Arthur Mead had lived in silence so complete it had a texture to it, heavy, like wool pulled over everything he'd ever known. The finest audiologists in the country had examined him, shaken their heads, and written their conclusions in the clean language of people who have never sat in a room that no longer makes sound. When his daughter drives him to Chicago's Hargrove Medical Center on a gray Tuesday in March, it is the last appointment she was able to get after 14 months on a wait list. The chief of audiology, Dr. Raymond Whitfield, has 42 published papers and a reputation that precedes him down every hallway he walks. He will spend 11 minutes with the general before deciding the case is closed. He will not be the one who changes anything. That will be the night shift nurse who is ending her double when the family arrives. The one in the vivid blue scrubs with a small silver pin above her name tag that nobody has ever thought to ask about. The one whose hands move with the practiced stillness of someone who has spent time in places that do not appear on maps. Welcome back to Quiet Badge's Stories. I'm glad you're here. If this is your first time, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know what city or state you're listening from. We've got people joining us from all over the country, and every name in those comments matters to this channel. If you've been here a while, tap that like button. It takes 1 second and it means everything. Now let's begin. Vivian Kwan did not leave at 7. She had been on the floor since 11 the previous night, and by 6:30 she had charted 3 post-op assessments, caught a medication discrepancy on a patient in room 14 that the day shift would not have found until noon, and walked the corridor of the otolaryngology wing twice because the overnight orderly had called out and nobody had restocked Bay 3. Her scrubs were the color of a clear morning sky. Her black hair was pulled back with a clip she'd had since her second deployment. A small silver pin sat above her name tag, a compass rose, worn down at the points. No one at Hargrove had ever asked what it meant. Her name tag read V. Kwan. It did not say what she had been before she was a nurse. She was finishing her notes at the station outside the audiology suite when the family came through the main doors at 7:04. She looked up out of habit. A woman in her early 40s, dark coat, moving with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been the strong one for too long. Behind her, a boy, maybe 8 or 9, in a green jacket with a University of Illinois patch on the sleeve, and between them, in a motorized wheelchair, a man. The man was tall even sitting down. You could see it in the frame of him. The width of the shoulders, the set of the jaw. His hair was white and close-cropped. He wore a dark blazer over a pale blue shirt, collar open. His hands rested on the armrests with the careful stillness of a person who has learned not to reach for things he cannot hear coming. Vivian looked at the side of his head. Behind his right ear, just below the hairline, there was a scar, small, oval, the color of old silver, the kind of mark most people would catalog as a removed mole, an old skin tag, something minor and forgettable. Vivian had not seen that scar in 9 years. She set down her pen. She had last seen it on a cadaver in a converted storage room at Fort Detrick, Maryland, in a program that filed its paperwork under a designation number rather than a name. She had spent 2 years learning to find that scar by touch in low light. She had spent another year learning what the device beneath it could do and what it needed to wake back up. She breathed in through her nose. She picked up a blank intake form. She walked toward the family. "Good morning, I'm Vivian Kwan. I'll be handling your intake this morning." The daughter looked up. Her eyes were the kind of steady that comes after you've cried everything out some years back and rebuilt yourself on the other side of it. "I'm Cora Mead, this is my son Theo, and this is my father." She paused. "General Arthur Mead, United States Air Force, retired." Vivian looked at the general. He was watching her face with the focused attention of a man who had spent 18 years learning to read lips in red rooms. His eyes were gray and clear and patient. She did not let her face move, but something in her chest did, something old and quiet and directional, like a needle that has been pushed off course and finally released. "It is an honor, General." He nodded once. His voice when he spoke was careful and deliberate, the voice of a man who cannot hear himself. "Ma'am." Cora reached for the folder in her bag. "We've been to Mayo, to Johns Hopkins, to a specialist in Houston and one in London. My father lost his hearing 18 years ago during a training incident at Nellis Air Force Base. An experimental ordnance test. The pressure wave. The damage was listed as bilateral sensorineural, complete. Every doctor has said the same thing. But last year a retired flight surgeon told us about Dr. Whitfield. Said he was doing research on nerve pathway stimulation. We've been on his wait list for 14 months. Vivian looked at the folder but did not take it. "May I check your vitals, General?" The general watched her lips, then nodded. She wrapped the cuff. She placed her fingertips on his wrist. 61. Pulse steady, a little slow. The resting rate of a man who had run 5 miles a morning for 30 years, and whose body remembered even when circumstance had changed. She noted it on the form. Then, with the careful motion of someone adjusting a collar, she moved the general's right ear forward just slightly with 2 fingers. The scar was exactly what she had thought it was, oval, 11 millimeters, slightly raised at the center, flat at the edges, the kind of implantation site left by a subcutaneous cochlear resonance bridge, placed in the field by an operator trained in the Joint Auditory Restoration Protocol, a program developed by the Army Medical Research and Development Command between 2004 and 2009, declassified in fragments over the following decade, and formally closed in 2014 when its funding was folded into a broader initiative that never materialized. Vivian replaced the general's ear gently. "General, did you receive any medical treatment in the field on the day of the incident? From a non-standard provider?" The general watched her lips. He was quiet for a moment. "There was a medical sergeant at the range. He did something to my head before the medevac came. I was in and out. I never knew what he did." Vivian wrote on the intake form, "Thank you, sir." The door at the end of the corridor opened, and Dr. Raymond Whitfield came through it. He was 56, silver-haired, with the posture of a man who has been photographed for department websites and knows it. His white coat was pressed. His ID badge had 3 lines of credential text beneath his name. He walked into the suite without greeting the family, lifted the folder from Cora's hand, read 2 pages, and closed it. "Mr. Mead." Cora's chin came up. "General Mead, doctor." Whitfield glanced at her. "General Mead, I've reviewed your history. I want to be direct with you because I respect your time. Complete bilateral sensorineural hearing loss of 18 years duration is not a condition for which any intervention, surgical, pharmaceutical, or otherwise, offers meaningful probability of restoration. The literature is unambiguous. I'm sorry you waited 14 months to hear me say that." Quan, his eyes moved to Vivian. "Discharge and refer to the cochlear implant program at Northwestern for a standard CI consult." He turned to leave. Vivian said, "Dr. Whitfield." He stopped, did not turn. "Dr. Whitfield, may I have a word with you in the hall?" Whitfield turned slowly. He looked at her the way a man looks at a clock that has begun running backward, with the specific irritation of something that should not be happening. "Miss Kwan, I do not take clinical consultations from nursing staff on cases I have just closed. Discharge the patient." Dr. Whitfield, same flatness. Theo had moved without anyone noticing and was now standing beside his grandfather's wheelchair, his hand on the armrest. He was looking at Dr. Whitfield with the steady, unreadable expression of a child who understands more than adults think he does. The general was watching Vivian's face. He had spent 18 years watching faces. He read something in hers that he could not have put a name to yet. Whitfield exhaled, 30 seconds, Quan. The corridor was empty. Whitfield crossed his arms. His eyes said, "Make this brief and make it the last time." Vivian did not cross her arms. Her hands were loose at her sides. "General Mead has a subcutaneous implant site behind his right ear, oval, 11 millimeters raised at center. It is consistent with a cochlear resonance bridge placed under the Joint Auditory Restoration Protocol, an Army MRDC program that ran from 2004 to 2009. Whitfield stared at her. "The bridge is not a cochlear implant in the conventional sense. It doesn't replace hearing. It maintains signal continuity across damaged auditory nerve tissue by routing low-amplitude acoustic resonance through a parallel pathway, essentially a bypass circuit that keeps the nerve from fully degenerating while the primary pathway is offline. If the general received this intervention within 2 hours of the blast, his auditory nerve may not be dead. It may be dormant. 18 years of dormancy, yes, but the bridge was designed to sustain indefinitely." Whitfield's arms dropped slightly. He caught them and recrossed them. "That technology does not exist." "It does, doctor. It's simply not in any civilian audiology literature because it was classified until 2014, and the program closed before any papers were submitted." Whitfield's jaw moved. "Where did you hear this?" "I didn't hear it. I worked in it." The silence in the corridor lasted 4 full seconds. Whitfield said, "You will return to that room, discharge the patient to Northwestern, and then I want you in my office at 9 o'clock to discuss what is going to happen next in your employment at this hospital." Vivian turned and walked back through the door into the suite. Cora was standing with her hand on her father's shoulder. Theo had not moved from the armrest. The general was looking at the door. Vivian walked to the side of the wheelchair and crouched so that her eyes were level with the general's. Her right hand rested on the edge of the armrest. She did not touch him yet. "General Mead." He watched her lips. "I would like to examine the area behind your right ear and run a brief assessment. With your permission. I'm not going to make you any promises. I haven't done this in 9 years and I don't know what condition the implant is in. But I believe the sergeant at Nellis that morning may have preserved more of your hearing than 18 years of specialists have known to look for. May I have your permission, sir? The general looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the compass rose pin above her name tag. He looked at the stillness in her hands. He had spent 4 decades reading airmen and combat medics under conditions where being wrong about a face meant people died. He read her now. He lifted his chin a 1/4 inch. Yes, ma'am. The door opened. Whitfield came back in. Kwan, I've spoken with the department coordinator. The patient is being discharged. I need you to. Dr. Vivian did not look up. She was already moving to the supply cabinet. I'm going to conduct a brief neurological assessment on the patient with his consent. It will take approximately 8 minutes. After that, the family can make whatever decision they choose. Cora stepped forward. We want her to. 14 months, doctor. My father hasn't had 8 uninterrupted minutes of a real examination in 18 years. Whitfield opened his mouth. The general did not raise his voice. He did not have to. He spoke with the deliberate weight of a man who had given orders on a flight line with 2 F-16s running 30 feet away. Doctor, I have been examined by 14 specialists on 3 continents. Not one of them has looked at the side of my head. This woman is going to look at the side of my head for 8 minutes. You may stay or you may go, but you will not stop her. Whitfield did not speak. Vivian removed 3 items from the cabinet: a small otoscope, a thin metal stylus with a rounded tip, and a device in a matte gray pouch sealed with a strip of medical tape that had yellowed at the edges. The pouch was unmarked. She set it on the rolling tray. Whitfield looked at it. What is that? She opened the pouch. Inside was a device the size of a large television remote, smooth gray casing, a small circular speaker grill on one end, 4 buttons arranged in a vertical column, and a thin wire ending in a single contact point smaller than a pencil eraser. It's an acoustic resonance calibrator. That is not standard equipment. No, doctor, it is not. Where did you get that? She did not answer. She turned to the general. General, I need to place this contact point against the implant site behind your ear. You may hear something, or feel something, pressure or warmth or a tone, or you may feel nothing at all. If anything causes pain, tell me and I'll stop immediately. He nodded. Cora stood very still. Theo pressed slightly closer to the wheelchair, his small hand white-knuckled on the armrest. Vivian placed the contact against the scar site. She held it with 2 fingers, the same 2 she used to feel for a pulse, steady, no shaking. She pressed the first button. The general's eyes widened slightly. Sir? He was reading her lips. Then he looked at the wall. Then he looked back at her. There is a sound, he said slowly, very low, like standing next to a generator. I haven't, his voice caught. He stopped, he breathed. I haven't heard anything in 18 years. Cora's hand went to her mouth. Vivian pressed the second button. The general inhaled sharply. His right hand gripped the armrest. He turned his head slightly toward the window, toward the sound of the traffic 8 floors below that he had not been able to hear when they drove in. He turned back to Vivian. Is that? It's the city, General, traffic, street noise. His jaw tightened in the way that jaws tighten when men who do not weep in front of strangers are working very hard at that particular task. Theo said in a voice barely above a whisper, Grandpa? The general turned his head toward the boy's voice. Not toward his face, toward the direction of the sound. Cora made a sound that was not a word. She pressed both hands over her mouth and sat down in the nearest chair because her legs had made a decision without consulting her. Theo said it again a little louder, Grandpa. The general reached out his left hand. He found the boy's shoulder. He pulled him close and held the back of his head with one large hand, and the boy pressed his face into the dark blazer, and neither of them moved for a long time. Whitfield had taken 3 steps forward without knowing it. His tablet was in his right hand. He had forgotten it was there. He was standing 4 feet from the wheelchair, and his face had the particular color of a man whose understanding of what is possible has just been rearranged without warning. He said, What did you just do? Vivian stood. The device was still in her hand. I reactivated the bridge, doctor. The resonance calibrator sends a matched frequency signal to the implant, essentially rebooting the parallel circuit. The nerve pathway has been in standby, not in failure. The bridge maintained minimum conduction for 18 years. The general's auditory nerve is atrophied but intact. Whitfield said, That's not possible. She looked at him. He looked at the general, who still had one hand on the back of his grandson's head. He looked at Cora, who was crying without making a sound. He looked back at Vivian. He said, Who are you? Vivian set the device on the tray. Staff Sergeant Vivian Kwan, she said quietly, United States Army, retired. I was a clinical operator with the Joint Auditory Restoration Protocol Program from 2007 to 2013. We were based at Fort Detrick. We tracked long-term outcomes for soldiers who had received cochlear resonance bridges in the field. Most of them were placed by combat medics in the first hours after blast injury. The medics were trained, the bridges worked, we had results. We were preparing a formal submission when the program was defunded in 2014, and our files were sealed. She paused. I have carried that device in my work bag for 9 years. I have never opened it until this morning. The general had loosened his hold on Theo. He was watching her face. He said, "How did you know? About me?" "I recognize the scar, sir. I've seen it before. I know exactly what it means." He was quiet for a moment. "Am I going to keep it? The hearing?" Vivian did not look away. "The bridge needs calibration and your auditory nerve needs significant rehabilitation. 6 to 8 months of auditory therapy, possibly more. The nerve has been in standby for a long time. What you have right now is a signal, not a full restoration. But General, you heard your grandson's voice. The nerve is alive. The road exists. I won't promise you where it ends, but I can tell you it is there." He closed his eyes. He opened them. 18 years, he said. "Yes, sir." He held out his right hand across the space between them. She took it. He did not shake it. He held it just for a moment. Then he let go. Whitfield had not moved. He said quietly, "Quan, I want the imaging suite, full MRI with cochlear contrast protocol and a brainstem auditory response study, today. And I want you in the room." "Yes, doctor." He paused. He looked at the floor. He was a man who did not look at floors. "I was wrong," he said. "To the room, not to anyone in particular, but everyone heard it. I was wrong and I am sorry." Vivian said, "Go order the imaging, doctor. We can deal with the rest later." He went. By 10 o'clock, the attending radiologist, Dr. Price, came to find Vivian in the hallway rather than sending the files through the system. She was a small, careful woman in her 50s who did not speak quickly. She said, "The bridge is intact. The brainstem response shows active conduction on the right side. It's faint, but it is there. On the left," she paused, "on the left the signal is stronger than I expected. I think the left bridge may have partially self-activated when you brought the right one online." Vivian said, "That's consistent with what we saw in bilateral cases in 2012. Price looked at her for a long moment. She said, "There are others, aren't there?" "Yes." "How many?" Vivian was quiet. "How many, Vivian?" 33 names on the original list, 22 still alive the last time I had access to it. That was 9 years ago. Price nodded once. She walked back toward the imaging suite with the steps of a person who has just received information that changes the shape of their morning. The general's room, when Vivian came back to it, was quiet. He was sitting by the window. Theo was beside him, talking. She could see the boy's mouth moving, animated, the way children talk when they have been given back something they didn't know they'd lost. The general was listening. His eyes were on his grandson's face with an expression she had only seen a handful of times in her life and did not have a word for. Cora met her in the doorway. "Is it real?" she said. "Is this actually happening?" "It's real." Cora's breath went out slowly. She looked at her father and her son. He talked about Theo every single day. "My son was born 9 years after the accident. My father has never heard his voice, not once, in 9 years. And this morning," she stopped. She looked at the floor. "This morning my son told my dad a knock-knock joke in the car on the way here and my dad couldn't hear it. He laughed anyway because Theo makes a face when he delivers the punchline. My dad laughed at the face. And I thought this was going to be one more appointment where we drive home in silence. And nobody says anything because there's nothing left to say." Vivian waited. Cora looked up. "Go sit with them." She went. The next morning, 2 men in dark suits arrived at Hargrove and asked to speak with Staff Sergeant Vivian Quan. One introduced himself as a representative of the Department of Defense Office of General Counsel. The other did not introduce himself and did not sit down. They met in a conference room on the 3rd floor. Vivian sat across from them with her hands folded on the table. Whitfield sat to her left. Hargrove's legal counsel, a woman named Aldrich who had the manner of someone who had been in many of these meetings and found them tedious, sat to Vivian's right. The Dodd representative said, "Sergeant Quan, you removed a restricted device from a federal research program." Vivian said, "I removed a personal calibration tool signed out under my name in the final inventory of a declassified program. I have the paperwork. The program's methodology is not fully in the public domain. Everything I did in that room yesterday falls within the published methodology. I violated nothing." His colleague leaned forward. "There are broader implications." "There were broader implications in 2014, Vivian said. "There are not now. The bridges are no longer being manufactured. There is no operational sensitivity left to protect. What you are protecting, sir, is a department's embarrassment over leaving 33 men and women without access to treatment they were entitled to receive." The colleagues sat back. The DUD representative said, "We would like to conduct a formal review before any additional procedures are performed." "How long?" 12 to 18 months. She looked at him. "There are 22 people on that list, 9 years older than the last time anyone checked. 3 of them, that I already know of, did not make it. Every month we wait, we lose more of the window. A cochlear resonance bridge can sustain a dormant nerve for decades, but the nerve itself has limits. Do you understand what 12 months means to a 64-year-old man whose auditory nerve has been in standby since Fallujah?" The door opened. Whitfield had made phone calls the previous evening. The department chief, the hospital board chair, the dean of the medical school, and a retired brigadier general who now sat on Hargrove's ethics advisory committee, and who walked into the conference room wearing a charcoal suit that did not disguise 30 years in uniform. His name was General Dale Ashworth, retired, and he looked at the 2 men from the DoD with the expression of a person who has seen this particular maneuver before and has no patience for it. He said, "Stand down. We left those people on that list. We closed the program for budget reasons, and we told ourselves it was for security reasons, and we left them. This woman did what we should have done a decade ago. You are going to let her finish it." The silence lasted 11 seconds. The representative closed his folder. He looked at Vivian. "The review will be expedited, 30 days. Vivian said, "Thank you." They left. Ashworth looked at Vivian. He brought his hand up to his temple and held a salute. She stood and returned it. He nodded once and walked out without another word. Aldrich gathered her papers. She said quietly, "Good morning, Sergeant." Vivian said, "Just the nurse, ma'am." Aldrich smiled once, brief and real, and left. The calls started that same afternoon. A woman in Tucson whose husband had a scar behind his left ear and had been deaf in one ear since 2005. A man in Fayetteville whose son-in-law had found an article online and recognized the description. A family in rural Montana who had been driving 3 hours to a VA facility every 6 weeks for appointments that ended the same way every time. Vivian wrote names on a legal pad. She wrote in the shorthand of someone who had written field reports that other people were not allowed to read. Name, branch, year, location of incident, last known status. She wrote until 7 in the evening. Then she called a number she had not dialed in 9 years. The woman who answered was Dr. Bridget Malone, formerly Captain Malone, AMRDC, now running a private audiology practice in Baltimore. She picked up on the second ring. "Viv. Bridget, I have the list, or most of it. I need help. I heard it was on the Tribune site 2 hours ago. I need someone who knows the protocol and isn't afraid. I've been waiting 9 years for this call. I'll be there tomorrow morning. Don't start without me." Vivian hung up. She looked at the legal pad. 22 names. 19 families who had already called. The phone rang again. She picked it up. Not all of them could be helped. 2 had implant degradation too advanced for the calibrator to reach. 1 had suffered additional nerve damage from a later injury. Vivian met with each of them personally. She told them exactly what the assessment showed. She did not make it easier than it was. One of them, a former Marine sergeant named Cyrus Bodell, gripped her hand at the end of the meeting and said, "Ma'am, you came anyway, even for the ones you can't fix." "Yes, sir, I came." He died 11 weeks later of an unrelated illness. His wife sent Vivian a card. It said only, "He spent his last months able to hear the birds outside the window. We left it open every morning." Vivian kept the card in the top drawer of the desk on the 2nd floor. The general completed his first round of auditory rehabilitation in April. He moved from the calibrated device to natural hearing in his right ear by the 6th week. Partial, intermittent, best in quiet environments. And by the 9th week, the left side came fully online in a way that Bridget Malone said she had only seen twice before and had never been allowed to publish. Theo came to the rehabilitation sessions every Saturday. He sat in the corner with a book and read quietly so that his grandfather could practice distinguishing sounds without distraction. On the day the general was cleared for unsupported hearing in moderate noise environments, Theo set down the book and said, at normal conversational volume from across the room, "Okay, Grandpa. Knock knock." The general turned from the window. His eyes found his grandson's face. He said, "Who's there?" Theo delivered the punchline. It was a bad joke. It had been his favorite for 4 months, and everyone in his life had already heard it at least twice. The general laughed. Not the polite laugh he had given in the car on the drive to Hargrove in March, the laugh at a face he could not hear. A real one, full. The laugh of a man who has just heard the same joke he'd been missing for 9 years, and found it exactly as terrible as he'd imagined and loved it completely. Cora was in the hallway. Vivian could hear her crying through the door. She did not go in. She stood in the corridor with her arms folded and looked at the scuff on the linoleum and let the moment belong to them. In September, Hargrove Medical Center held a small ceremony in the audiology department's third-floor conference room. Not a press event. Those had come and gone in the spring, 3 weeks of coverage after the Tribune piece, then a quieter month, then a joint paper in the Journal of the American Medical Association with Vivian's name and Whitfield's on it. Whitfield had put her name first. He had not been asked to. The ceremony was for the patients and their families and the staff. 14 veterans were present, 6 with full hearing restoration, 5 with partial, 3 still in early rehabilitation. Some had driven from out of state. Every one of them who had been told to wear whatever was comfortable had chosen instead to find their uniform and put it back on. The general stood at the front of the room without assistance. He had not needed any in 6 weeks. He gripped the lectern with both hands and looked at the room and did not use a microphone. He said, "I lost my hearing at 53 years old. I was told I would never get it back. I told my daughter to make peace with it. I told myself to make peace with it. For 18 years I sat in rooms full of sound and heard nothing, and I told myself that was the shape my life had taken, and that was that." He paused. In March of this year, a nurse came into an examination room and looked at the side of my head. She looked at something that 14 specialists had looked at and not seen. And what happened after that is why every person in this room is standing here today. He looked across the front row. The veterans looked back at him. Some of them nodded. "I want to thank Dr. Whitfield, who had the courage to step aside and the greater courage to step back in. I want to thank Dr. Malone, who drove from Baltimore with 9 years of files in a duffel bag. I want to thank every person in this hospital who held a door open when we did not know what we were walking into." He looked across the room. "And I want to thank one more person. A person who has been a nurse at this hospital for 7 years, who carried a device in her work bag for 9 years without opening it, who stood in a hallway and told a department chief he was wrong in a voice that did not shake, and who is, by every official measure available to the United States Army, just a nurse." Vivian was in the second row. She had not expected this part. "Staff Sergeant Vivian Kwan," the general said, "would you come up here, please?" She stood. She was in scrubs bright blue, the compass rose pin above her name tag. She walked to the front. Her shoes were quiet on the carpet. The general stepped back from the lectern and walked the 4 steps to her. He brought his right hand up to his temple. In the front row, the 14 veterans stood, some on their own, some with help. Each brought a hand to his or her temple. Bridget Malone stood in the third row in a civilian blazer, her hand up. 2 of the audiology techs behind her stood and did the same. Whitfield was at the back. He had never served in anything. He brought his right hand up to his temple in the imperfect approximation of a man who is doing the only thing available to him to say what he means. He held it. Vivian's throat closed. Her eyes were level. Her chin was level. She raised her right hand, the one with the faint calluses from years of work in places she could not name in public, and she returned the salute. She held it. Then she dropped it. The room began to applaud. Afterward, Theo came to find her first. He was 9 now, a September birthday, and he was taller than he had been in March by what seemed like an impossible amount. He said, "My grandpa heard me do the knock-knock joke." "I know, I heard you from the hallway." Theo considered this. He said, "He told me it was a good joke." She looked at him. "He said that?" "He said I should keep doing it." She almost smiled. "That sounds about right." He nodded seriously and went back to find his grandfather. Cora came last. She put her arms around Vivian without asking and held on. Vivian held her back. After a moment, Cora stepped away and took a breath and said, "My father wants his old study back. He closed it up when he lost his hearing because he said there was no point sitting in a room full of records he couldn't listen to. This weekend we're going to open it up and put the needle on the first record, and he's going to sit in his chair and just listen." She stopped. "Miss Kwan, I don't know how to thank you." Vivian said, "Your father did the work. You did the work. Theo did the work. I just opened a case." "You opened a case nobody knew was there." "Yes. That's everything." Cora walked back to her family. Vivian watched the 3 of them, the general, Cora, Theo, the boy's hand tucked inside his grandfather's hand, move through the room, through the people, through the low September light coming in through the conference room windows. For a moment she forgot to breathe. Whitfield came up beside her with 2 paper cups of coffee. He handed her one, black, no sugar. "There are 11 names left on the list," he said. "We haven't found them yet." "I know. I want to keep looking." "Yes, doctor." He was quiet for a moment, then Vivian. She looked at him. "Thank you." She nodded once. She took a sip. It was the right temperature. She walked out into the corridor. The lights hummed the way they always did. The antiseptic smell was the same. The long hall stretched toward the elevator bank and the wing she had walked every night shift for 7 years. She rode down to the main floor. She walked past the station where she had been finishing her notes, when the family came through the doors in March. She walked toward the end of the first-floor corridor. Through the glass of the intake room, she saw a man in a wheelchair, 60s, maybe older. A younger woman stood beside him, gripping the handles the way people grip handles when they have been holding on for a very long time. The patient's head was bowed. He was looking at his hands. There was something behind his left ear. Vivian paused. She breathed in through her nose. She pushed the door open. "Good morning. I'm Vivian Kwan. I'll be your intake nurse today."